These two boxes of Rallyman are jam-packed with possibilities, and it's my intention to highlight all of the interesting things you can do with them. This is Shakedown. In today's Shakedown, we're pitting all kinds of formulas against each other to see which one is the number one. Since wheels have turned, there have been drivers wanting to race against each other to determine who is the best, and Formula One has been a home to the very best and fastest that motorsport has to offer. From the 60s, where speed was all too often followed by sudden catastrophic stops, to the 80s, where technology and aerodynamics were pushing cars into and along the circuits at an ever-increasing pace, and on to the turn of a new century where the culmination of decades of experience resulted in some of the fastest wheeled vehicles on the planet, there isn't a point in Formula One history that isn't interesting for one reason or another. Can we capture any of that rich history in Rallyman? Do we have the formula for success? Today we find ourselves at an old layout of Monza, the Temple of Speed as it existed in the early 1960s or so, which means we'll have half a lap hurtling around the big banked oval at top speed, providing we get there safely. We're not going to trouble ourselves with changing weather, so it'll be a dry race run to the usual Rallyman GT rules. This track is from Formula Rallyman, which you can find on Board Game Geek, and it isn't just a collection of tracks, as 4 new car classes and a whole load of NPCs are included, allowing you to race through any period of Formula One history against the best of the best. The oldest car class is the F4, and it makes use of the double downshift ability that you might be familiar with from the original Rallyman Dirt, before the brake die was invented. Luckily for Mike Hawthorne here, the F4 also has access to a brake die, so he'll have some options to get around the circuit and make life as difficult as he can for the competition. The next class is the F5 Aero, portraying cars from a time where engineers were learning just what made them go quick, but in a very trial and error kind of way. They have the double upshift ability, where they can skip gears when accelerating, but risk spinning out if it all goes wrong. No stranger to speed and spins is James Hunt, who, if nothing else, will hope to put on a show for the crowds. As teams and drivers learned more and more, the reliability of the F5 class increases, and that's where the F5 Turbo comes in. They swap the double upshift for a boost die, and while they won't quite be as quick through the gears as their aero cousins, they will at least be more likely to stay out on track, though driving the F5 Turbo today is Nigel Mansell, who has the flat-out trait, which may well undo all of that engineering progress. Finally, the more modern class, the F6, raced here on its soft tyres, where it may end up moving 9 spaces each turn. Such is the power of their brakes and the efficiency of their boosting through the gears. It's being driven by the Iceman Kimi Räikkönen, and if an NPC could roll their own dice, you can bet he would. All the NPCs will be racing at their highest difficulty, and the F4 will be on pole, followed by the F5s, and finally the F6. This is a one-lap race where I expect the cars to cross the finish line in a very different order, but anything can happen, and it usually does, so let's find out what will. First off the grid is Mike Hawthorne in his F4. He's going to go out into as high a gear as he can, as soon as he can, and that will put him in 4th gear around the first corner. He will not be in the lead for very long, I imagine, but we will see as we see what James Hunt can do in the F5 Aero. He has the ability to double upshift. I can tell you now that with the dice that he's rolled, he's not going to need to do that. So let's see what he can do. He wants to get into 5th gear if he can. That is going to be something like this. He can duck into the inside in gear 4 and then emerge in 5th gear alongside Mike Hawthorne. That will of course mean that the first die is treated as a hazard. It happens to be a hazard already, so there is no worries whatsoever for James Hunt on that turn. He finishes in 5th gear around the outside of Mike Hawthorne. Up next is Nigel Mansell, and he is in a grid slot further back, so his run to the first corner is a little bit compromised. What he could do is boost up to 5th reliably, thanks to his boost die, and then duck into the inside in 4th gear. I'm sure he would have wanted to finish in 5th. Not on this occasion. He's going to have to bide his time and overtake Mike Hawthorne a little later on. As we see what Kimi Räikkönen can do, one hazard on gear 4 to worry about. So what's he going to do? He's going to go 1, 2 into third. He can place down all of his coasts to get him to the corner. He's going to put down gear 4. It would turn into a hazard, of course, for being in the dangerous space, but it's already a hazard, so he's not going to be worried about that. He's then going to use all of the downforce of his F6 to go around the outside of James Hunt in 5th gear, and that will be his turn. James Hunt has rolled a fair few hazards, so he's not going to be able to get the most out of this turn. He's going to finish on the inside in 5th gear. Kimi Raikkonen, on his soft tyres, wants to make the most of them, of course. He does have to go the long way around the corner, so a couple of coast die will do that. He can then get up to 6th gear in order to overtake James Hunt. And then what he can do is brake all the way down to 2nd gear on the inside using 3 brake dice and the gear 2 into 3rd and then into 4th like that. So sacrificing turn order for the cars behind, but certainly getting towards that corner faster than other cars anticipated. Next up is Mike Hawthorne. Unfortunately, his car is already showing signs of age compared to the technological advancements of those ahead of him. He is going to end in 4th gear behind James Hunt. Next up is Nigel Mansell, and he would like to be somewhere in 5th alongside James Hunt, and then somewhere into the corner like that. Coming alongside Mike Hawthorne would turn his dice into a hazard because of Mike's defender trait, but Nigel Mansell has the opportunist trait, so he may ignore a hazard when overtaking, so that's going to be placed on gear 4 like that. To get to gear 4, he needs to be in at least gear 3, so he can do something like that. He would need to start his turn with a breakdown to 2nd gear, easily done, and he finishes ahead of the challenging pack in 5th gear. Next round, he gets to go again. He needs to be in at least 4th gear here, and then he would like to break down to 2nd for the corner. He could go into 3rd and then boost up to 5th gear in order to take the inside space there. What can James Hunt do? Now, he does have the double upshift ability, but his gear 5 die was a hazard, so that will result in a loss of control if he chooses to do that. So he will not, he will sit back just a space. He is there in 3rd gear, hoping that Kimi Raikkonen behind has a hard time. Let's see what Kimi can do. He is going to need to break down to 2nd gear for the corner. He can then get into 3rd gear to overtake James Hunt, and he can then boost up to 5th gear on the inside. A bit of a short turn, but he regains turn order thanks to having better brakes than the F5 Turbo. Finally, it's Mike Hawthorne at the back. He is going to coast through in 4th gear. And then what he can do is use his brake or his double downshift to get into 2nd gear. And then we are going to put him into 3rd gear alongside James Hunt. And as it happens, it takes turn order from him for being on the inside. He catches up to the back of the pack, even though he is only racing in F4. Next round, Kimi Raikkonen really wants to put some space between him and the cars behind. He must break down to 1st gear, so that is done with 1 hazard as he takes the tightest line through there. He can then get up through the gears to guarantee turn order. He is going to emerge in 6th gear. In the Rallyman universe, the track does look slightly different as we go over the banked corner rather than underneath it, but Kimi is going to sit there in 6th gear and solidify his lead. Next up, Nigel Mansell is going to have a full set of dice to work with. He needs to break down to 2nd gear, which he can do using those 2 brake dice. He will then show off the technology in his car by boosting up to 3rd gear, thanks to the boost die, and he's going to go onto the bridge in 5th gear. It is Mike Hawthorne's turn, 4th gear, behind Nigel Mansell. Can James Hunt stay in the fight? He's going to do exactly the same. He's going to drop to 1st and then come up through the gears into 3rd for 1 hazard, and then alongside Mike Hawthorne for another hazard, thanks to that defender trait. And that will be James Hunt's turn. Next round, and Kimi Räikkönen is on aged soft tyres. He's going to maintain his lead by diving through the corner in second gear, and he can then get into third, fourth, fifth, and then sixth once again. And he has just one more turn left on these tyres before he needs to consider his options. Next up, Nigel Mansell. He is going to coast towards the corner. He can break down to second gear, but that's 2 hazards on both of his brake dice. So if he wants to get up to fifth gear, he is going to need to re-roll with one of his traits. So he is going to have a determined roll. He's going to try and get rid of this hazard on gear 5. He does manage it, which means he is behind Kimi Räikkönen in fifth gear. James Hunt is next. He's going to coast towards the corner there. He's going to break down into second gear, dip into first gear, and then use his double upshift to get into third, and then can take the inside in fifth gear. Finally, Mike Hawthorne. He is going to, I think, coast along the bridge, and he will then use a double downshift and a brake in order to get into first gear, through the corner in second, and then out in fourth on the inside. That is the best that he could do with what he has rolled, and given that the cars ahead are all in fifth gear and he doesn't have it, that's pretty good anyway. Kimi Räikkönen then finishes another turn in sixth gear, but his tyres have now degraded to the point where 2 hazards will be his limit. James Hunt has the inside for this corner, and he's got a clean set of dice to work with. He is going to drop down to second gear, dip into the inside in first. He can then coast through, use his double upshift to get into third gear, and then finish his turn a few spaces further down the track in fifth. Nigel will want to match that as much as he can. He has got a couple of hazards on his gears, however, so he's going to break down to second gear like that. That is 1 hazard. Drop to first, coast through. He can then boost up to gear 3 for a second hazard, and then into fourth gear. And then he would like to overtake James Hunt. His fifth gear is another hazard, so he is going to use his opportunist trait to ignore that hazard when overtaking, allowing him to come alongside in fifth gear. And it's up to fourth gear once again for Mike Hawthorne. It's time for Kimi to head onto the banked oval. He's going to break down to third gear to hit the speed limit there. He can coast through the first banked corner. He can then drop down into first using another brake die. That's 1 hazard. He will have to go into second and then use his Just Leave Me Alone trait to re-roll the boost die, hoping to get rid of a hazard, which he does. He is going to therefore go up into fourth gear, under the bridge in this alternate universe, over it in real life. And he will emerge in sixth gear on the back straight there. A solid turn for Kimi. James Hunt is looking to keep Nigel Mansell behind him, and he can do so with a couple of coasts towards the first corner there. He can break down to second gear. He can drop to first, use 1 double upshift to get into third gear, and a second double upshift to get into fifth gear like that. Can Nigel Mansell follow? There's not enough technology on this car to quite overtake James Hunt as he goes around the outside and up onto the banked corner. Can Mike Hawthorne catch up? He certainly can. He is in fourth gear behind Nigel Mansell. Next round, Kimi Räikkönen. You can see the crowds at the home straight. His win is very much guaranteed. James Hunt is next, and he has got Nigel Mansell to fend off. Down to first, into second, third, a double upshift to fifth, and then a couple of coasts to get him as far down the track as possible. What can Nigel Mansell do? He would very much like just one more coast die in order to secure the overtake, but it is not happening so far. And we know what Mike Hawthorn is going to do. He is going to be as consistent as ever. He is behind James Hunt in 4th gear. Can Kimi finish? He's got a single hazard to re-roll. It doesn't get rid of it, but I'm sure he has some traits that will, should he need them. He does have a 2 hazard limit, so it's lucky that he only rolled the 1. We are going to see how best he can get over the finish line then. He is going to coast towards the stadium, and then he can just slow down and gloat across the finish line. 6.54, hazard on the 3, and then 2. That'll be a win for the F6 as Kimi Raikkonen brings it home with no fuss whatsoever. And from there, it was all very formal. James Hunt hanging on to his 2nd place, Nigel Mansell unable to overtake, and Mike Hawthorn bringing up the rear to show that there still is some pace in the F4s, just not enough to get past faster opposition on a track built for speed. Might Hawthorn have won Were We Racing on the Streets of Monaco? We could easily find out, as you can pick and choose whichever parts of Formula Rallyman you like the sound of to make the kind of races that you want to see. These cars, drivers and tracks can, like everything else in Rallyman, be mixed and matched with other variant rules to create the Formula 1 World Championship, for example. And with a bit of tinkering, maybe you could even take these cars off-road. Whatever your formula for fun looks like, may it serve up some great games of Rallyman. Until next time, thanks for watching Shakedown.